Hey everyone, this is Finn, and in this video I'm going to be giving you an introduction to a Unity 2D project. A Unity 2D project is just like a 3D project, except for the camera is going to be orthographic instead of perspective, and we'll talk about what that means. And the objects that we are using are going to be mainly 2D objects. We can also use 3D objects, but we will be viewing them from a one-sided perspective. Let's press the blue New button at the top right, and make sure that you are selecting your 2D template instead of your 3D template. It is to the left of the 3D template. Make sure this blue outline is surrounding this button. And I'm going to rename my project name 2D project and press create. When your scene loads up, you'll notice two things. One, our scene view no longer lets us see a 3D environment. We are looking at our camera game object here, and it shows us the white boundary lines of our camera, but we are no longer moving in a 3D space, we are moving in 2D space. Right now I am holding Alt and using my left button to drag myself around. You'll also notice that there is no longer a skybox. We are seeing a black solid color, and in our game view we are seeing a blue solid color. Let's select our main camera, and you can see our camera preview also shows this solid blue color. Over here in our inspector, where it says clear flags, which is what displays in empty areas of the camera's view, that's where our skybox normally is. In this option we have solid color selected. That is standard for a 2D project. That just means instead of our skybox void, we get a solid color void. Right here where it says background, this color, if you select it, it brings up a color picker. In this color picker you can change the void color that you see in this game view. You can also put a 2D sprite as our background just by dragging a 2D sprite into our hierarchy and scaling it out to the correct size. Our void here isn't meant to be our background, it's just meant to be what you see when nothing else is there. Sometimes that can be a background if all your background is a simple color, but for most games you're going to create your own 2D environment. I'm going to leave the color as it is and press X to close that color picker. The next thing you'll notice is that the projection is orthographic instead of perspective. Now what does that mean? To demonstrate what that means, I'm going to go back to our scene view, and let's click this button up here that says 2D. Let's read what it says. It says, when toggled on, the scene is in 2D view. When toggled off, the scene is in 3D view. That means that this 2D view that we are seeing right here, we are able to turn that off by clicking this button, and we will be able to see the same scene as a 3D view. It just allows us to open up that third dimension. Now we are able to turn and rotate and experience the depth of the scene. Right now, you'll notice that our main camera starts here and creates a box shape that projects the boundaries of the camera screen. And it captures anything inside of this rectangle shape that's extending outwards. If it doesn't exist inside of this rectangle shape, then we won't be able to see it in our view. Watch what happens if I change this projection setting back to perspective. That is what our setting is normally for a 3D scene. Now you can see instead of having a set screen size and projecting outwards, our perspective starts from a certain point and then allows the player to see multiple directions outward, and you'll be able to view the objects inside of these boundaries from a perspective instead of in a uniform, very straight on way. I'm going to change my projection setting back to orthographic. That's exactly how we need it. And then I'm going to change the view back to a 2D view by clicking this 2D button up here. Click it, and that'll toggle it back on. If your box is smaller, you can double click your main camera object and it'll bring you back closer to where your projected screen is. The rest of the settings for your camera component are going to be about the same for a 3D scene. You can put either 3D or 2D objects. The main of the 2D objects is going to be the sprite. Right here in my project folders, I have an image called potato. This is just a simple exported PNG with a transparent background. And if you go over here to Inspector, when selecting it in your project window, you just got to make sure that it says Sprite, 2D, and UI. You might find that it is on default at first, and if that's the case, just click this drop-down menu and select Sprite. There are two ways that I can add this potato sprite to my 2D scene. I can right-click into my hierarchy, go down to 2D Object, and then Sprite. There you can see there's a faint circle representing my empty sprite. If I go over to the New Sprite Game Objects Inspector, I'll see that it has a setting for sprite, which you can select which sprite you want to render. Right now it has nothing in there. To replace that with our potato image, I'm going to go over to the very right of the None box, the None selection box. I'm going to click this little bullseye looking icon. It's a circle with a little dot inside, and it'll open up all of the available PNGs or images that we can use for a sprite inside of our assets. Let's click potato, and you can see it automatically renders that sprite when we select it. If I select the other available ones like input field, UI sprite, checkmark, those are more meant to be UI elements, so they are very small. You can see that it changes it to them as well. I'm going to select potato. The size of the sprite is determined by the actual size of the image, and since this is 500 by 500 pixels, this is how big our sprite of a potato is. Right now, we aren't able to see our potato sprite in the game view, and that's because of our position. First, I'm going to rename the new sprite potato. And then let's look at the transform component. Notice how our Z value is -10. In order to see the actual position of our potato, I'm going to toggle off the 2D view. And as you can see, we can't see our main camera because it's not selected. But if we do select it, we are in front of the main camera instead of in view of it. If I change the potato Z coordinate to 0, and then select the main camera again, we can see that our potato sprite is now in the view of our camera. As long as it's not past -10 on the Z position axis, then you will be able to see your potato. You also want to make sure that it is inside of the view on the left and right, and the top and the bottom. And just double check those boundaries by selecting your main camera and looking at that white box. I'm going to toggle on 2D view again by clicking this button here. And now I will show you how to scale your potato if you want to. Select your sprite game object, and using either the rect tool from your transform tools or your scale axes, you can scale your potato by everything except for the z-axis. A sprite won't scale by the z-axis because it only exists in the x and y dimensions. I'm going to delete my potato sprite by right-clicking and pressing delete. And to show you the second way of inserting your sprite game object, I'm going to click with my left click and drag my potato sprite to my hierarchy. And that's the other way of inserting a 2D sprite game object. To add a 3D game object, you do the same as in a 3D project. You just right click in your hierarchy, go to 3D object, and let's add a cube. I'm going to use my move tool to move it to the side. And you can see it looks very flat, but if I toggle off the 2D view, it is a standard cube. Our scene isn't lit because we do not have a directional light, so you aren't able to see very many details. Our sprites do not need any lights, but any 3D objects do need lights to be able to have lighting. And with that, you can scale and do anything to the 3D object as you would in a 3D project. I'm going to right-click my cube and delete it from my scene. Now I'm going to toggle back on a 2D view. And let's scale down our potato by making the X, Y axes 0.5 in its scale. And then I'm going to move my potato sprite up. And now let's press play on our scene. Notice that I have maximize on play selected. That's why we got to full screen here. Also notice that our potato isn't doing much. That's because we don't have any gravity. Our potato is just a static 2D sprite. Press play to exit play mode. I am going to turn off maximize on play for now. Now I'm going to add a component. And I'm going to start typing rigid body, just like we would when we want to add physics to a 3D game object, but instead of just selecting rigid body, we are going to select rigid body 2D. Notice that the settings are slightly different. Instead of use gravity, we have something called a gravity scale. But right now, it is the same as the default setting of just using normal gravity. It is 1. Let's press play. And our potato can fall. Now let's try adding a collider to our object. I am going to click Add Component. I'm going to start typing collider. And let's look at the different options we have. Not only are there normal colliders, but there are 2D colliders, just like how we have a 2D rigid body and a normal rigid body. For the shape of our potato, I think, excuse me. For the shape of our potato, I think it would be best if we used a Capsule Collider 2D. We don't want to use a circle collider, because if we use a circle collider, then it is going to need to be a perfect round circle, but our potato is not a perfect round circle, it's more of an oval shaped object. So we are going to use a Capsule Collider 2D and add that component. Then you want to make sure that the direction down here of your capsule collider, instead of being vertical, is horizontal, because the shape of our potato is wider on the horizontal axis than it is on the vertical one. Then we want to take our y-axis and bring it down here where it says size. I'm going to bring it down I'm actually going to change the y-axis offset, which is the little position there. If I move the y-axis up and down, you'll see the green area of our collider moves up and down. I'm going to just align it more of the center of our potato there. Decrease the y-axis a little bit more. You kind of just want to adjust little bit by little bit. There we go. And now I will tuck in the x-axis. And you can see I created a pretty good shape for our potato here. To test this, I am going to create a 3D object to represent our floor. I'm going to right-click in our hierarchy, 3D object, cube. I'm going to change the XY position as well as the Z to 0 and move our box down. Then I am going to scale by the x-axis about 20. Now the last thing we need to do is click on our cube, rename it floor, and then notice that we have a box collider, but since we are working with 2D sprites, we want to change that to a box collider 2D. So to remove this component, go to your three dots up here at the top right of your component, and then click remove component. Now I'm going to click add component and select box collider 2D. Now let's press play to test our scene. And now our potato collides with the floor. This has been a pretty basic introduction to a Unity 2D scene. I hope this has been helpful. Have a wonderful day.